Hey everyone, welcome to Logan's Mosh Pit. Glad to have you here. Do me a favor and please subscribe if you haven't already. Also consider joining my Patreon page for some cool perks. I'll leave a link in the description. Thanks for tuning in to a new episode of Rock and Read. Today we'll pick up where we left off with part 2 of chapter 11 of White Line Fever by Lemmy. Part 2 is called Mikkey D. No, not the place with the golden arches. I'm talking about the drummer, Mikkey D. Here we go. We found another manager, finally, on that Operation Rock and Roll tour, Doug Banker. He had worked with Ted Nugent, and he had also created some gambling system that got him banned from Las Vegas. But anyway, he came up to us at one of the shows, and we decided to work with him. When he started off, he seemed quite good, but then it began to degenerate. I think part of it was that he lived in Detroit, and we really needed to have somebody right there on hand, not halfway across the continent. Plus, he still had things going on with Ted Nugent in some form or another. I'm not quite sure what happened, really. The bottom line is, he just didn't get into it enough, and with Motorhead, you've got to be all or nothing. Either do it completely, or don't bother, because it's a hard fight for us, and we need someone who's going to fight full time. I don't think Doug Banker realized that, and that he would have to put up with too much record label, accusations regarding incidents we weren't guilty of, etc. I admit, we're a tough band to work with, but it took Doug and us a few months to realize how transitory our working relationship was going to be. In the months after the Operation Rock and Roll tour, things were looking up, which was a change. Things hadn't looked up for Motorhead in about a decade. We had all these great reviews, our new management, which hadn't yet had time to sour, and 1916 got nominated for a Grammy. To be honest, I was quite surprised when I got word of it. If I had known what an anticlimax the ceremony was going to be, I probably would have just said off and left it at that. I was beginning to do quite nicely financially after more than a quarter of a century in the music business. A good portion of this was thanks to the Ozzy Osbourne album, No More Tears. That record sold millions, and I wrote the lyrics to 4 songs on it. I've since written more, and a couple appear on Osmosis. That was one of the easiest gigs I ever had. Sharon rang me up and said, "I'll give you X amount of money to write some songs for Ozzy," and I said, "Alright, you got a pen?" I wrote 6 or 7 sets of words, and he ended up using 4 of them for the songs Desire, I Don't Want to Change the World, Hellraiser, and Mama, I'm Coming Home. I made more money out of writing those 4 songs for Ozzy than I made out of 15 years of Motorhead. Ludicrous, isn't it? I'd like to mention that I'm available for more songwriting if anybody is interested. Quite reasonable rates, just the mortgage on your firstborn child. By the time 1992 had begun, we were working on songs for the next Motorhead record, which came to be known as March or Die. The Grammy ceremony happened during this period. Doug Banker and his wife attended along with me. His wife was sitting in between me and him, but when they were announcing the candidates for Best Metal Performance, he switched seats very quickly, just in case, so he could get on camera. That was funny as... Metallica won that night, of course. They had sold something around 4 million albums, while we had racked up about 30,000, so it wasn't even a competition. But the acknowledgement was nice. If only for length of service, we should get a medal from the music business. All we ever got from Sony were headaches. And I have more to tell, so hang on to your corsets. 1916 was our most critically acclaimed record as far as the mainstream went. It got a great review in Rolling Stone, and an A+ in Entertainment Weekly. Actually, the woman who helped me write this book wrote the Entertainment Weekly review, but that was long before she met us. So, in that way, it was a success. And we made a success of our months on the road. We got the audience off its ass, we got the crew off their asses, we got the promoters off their asses, and we got our managers off their asses. Or off ours. The only thing we weren't successful at was getting the record company off its ass. We thought maybe we'd be able to accomplish that with March or Die. Ha! Fooled again. There were other problems too that became glaringly apparent when we were getting ready to make March or Die. The biggest one was Phil Taylor. When he came back to the band in 1987, things started off okay, but they gradually got worse. For a long time we were trying to convince ourselves that Phil was alright, but he really wasn't. In '84, he left because he idolized Thin Lizzy and thought that with Robbo, he could do the best for himself musically. He began to look down on what Motorhead did, and of course when he came back, other than the fact that we were better, Motorhead was basically very similar to when he left, so there was something missing in his drumming when he returned. Eat the Rich wasn't a particularly well-played track as far as drums went, and after Orgasmatron, rock and roll was pretty feeble for drums. He would start tracks out at one pace and then end up at another. It was really fraught because you'd go on stage not knowing what was going to happen, and you couldn't discuss anything with him because he'd just go nuts. Once Phil Campbell said to him, "You played like a tonight," and he went nuclear. But of course, Filthy always hurts himself when he goes nuclear. He was losing it offstage too. There was the time he tried to climb out of his room through the bathroom mirror at the park sunset thinking it was a window. He rang me up saying, "It's time for sound check, and I can't get out of my room." And this was at 5 o'clock in the morning. It was great timing because I was just about to climb over on this woman. So as you can imagine, I was pretty pissed off. But I told the chick, "Stay there, hold that thought," and went downstairs. Sure enough, his door was jammed, and as we were both trying to push it, me outside, Phil in, the LAPD came up behind me with a huge pistol. There I was, dressed in underpants and a kimono, and the cops got me against the wall, patting me down. Procedure run amok. Then he started asking me questions like, "Is he dangerous in there?" "Oh yeah, I said, "he's pretty dangerous, mostly to himself. I wouldn't worry about it." Then the cop wanted to know, "Has he got any weapons?" "Oh, he uses anything, furniture, walls, anything." The cops couldn't get in through the door either, so they went in through the window and busted the door out with a puncher. And Phil was sitting there covered in cuts and bruises, trying to climb through the bathroom mirror. Didn't he notice somebody who looked just like him coming through from the opposite direction? You'd think he'd get out of the way, wouldn't you? Like that was happening a lot. Maybe we could have handled these incidents, but the fact that he couldn't keep time was just too much. He was really bad in the end. On 1916, we had to put him on a metronome to do Going to Brazil. Then he was supposed to get together with Wurzel and Phil Campbell in London to work on the songs for March or Die. I was in LA at the time, furiously writing more lyrics, and it was a disaster. They played for half an hour, and Phil Campbell turned around to Phil Taylor and said, "You don't know these things, do you?" "No, I don't," he replied. "How come? We've been practicing them at home, me and Wurzel. Why don't you know them?" "My Walkman broke at Christmas." Good excuse, eh? And this was weeks and weeks after the holidays. So that was pretty bad news. And by March, when we played at Randy Rhoads' tribute concert at Irvine Meadows, it was worse. By then, we knew we had to fire him. We had started recording the new album, and it wasn't working out at all. But while it was necessary, I always feel bad about the way I fired him. I did it on the phone, and it wasn't right. I shouldn't have done it that way, but I just couldn't face another fit. We had warned him 3 times in the past 2 years to get his act together, and Phil had been in the band long enough to know when he was up. But it didn't seem to bother him, and finally, he had to go. Tommy Aldridge did most of the drums on March or Die, except for Ain't No Nice Guy, which Phil did, and Hellraiser, which was done by our new drummer, Mikkey D. I had known Mikkey for many years. Motorhead did a tour with Merciful Fate when Brian Robertson was in our band, and Mikkey, who is Swedish, was their drummer. In fact, I had asked him to join the band once before, around the time Pete Gill joined up, but he was just joining Dawkins at the time, so he couldn't do it. This time I cornered him at the Rainbow. He was living in LA at the time, and he was free. So we had him down and tried him out. The first thing Mikkey did with us was Hellraiser, and he was very good immediately. It was obvious that it was going to work. We did 2 songs with him in the studio, Hellraiser and Hell on Earth, one of Motorhead's eternally amazing lost tracks. And then we immediately went out on the road with Ozzy. It was trial by fire time for Mikkey, and he was scared but he performed miraculously. It was funny, really, because the rest of the band had their doubts about him. After all, here was Mikkey with his big blonde hair, and he's good looking and he knows it. So there were a lot of snide big hair comments going on and all this about glam rock. But it only took Mikkey one show to shut them all up. It was Zippo time, not a word after that. Everyone was going, holy! And I was laughing, saying, yeah, wasn't it you guys that were going on about and glam rock just an hour earlier? Mikkey, I have to say, is the best drummer I've ever played with. Having said that, I want to add that Phil Taylor was excellent in his day, too. Between being such a great drummer and having that massive big blonde hair, Mikkey is an absolute wonder as far as attitude goes. He's even more arrogant than me, and that's saying something. But he's got a sense of humor about himself, which makes it alright. I mean, if he didn't have a sense of humor about himself, he'd be unbearable. But he's so flash that it sends me into fits. He knows what he's doing the whole time. He'll be doing a number on a bunch of birds and then he'll catch my eye and we'll just laugh. Occasionally, however, he'll have a false sense of security. One time we were in a house in France on a boat for some reason. There were all these little floating brothels. Mikkey, Phil, a couple lads from the crew and myself were there because there was nowhere else to go, basically. And we had thought it was a strip bar, but it turned out to be house. Doesn't make much difference in France. They only had champagne and I didn't have anything to drink, but the other guys did. At the end of the night we got a bill for something like 200,000 francs. So Mikkey went completely ape, screaming, I'm not gonna pay them, with this thick Swedish accent that comes out when he's pissed off. They called the cops immediately, and the French cops hate Englishmen even more than they hate other Frenchmen. So the CRS, the riot police, came in and they had guns, and Mikkey shouting, why are you here? It's a house. You're part of this clip joint. You French and all this. And this cop had his pistol pulled and Mikkey was tearing open his shirt, going, go on, shoot me. And we kept telling him, don't do that, mate, because he will shoot you. He wants to shoot you. Finally, we were able to drag him out. He kicked the police car, and the cops were right behind him, but he got away with it all. They probably didn't want anything to do with a loony like him. And that champagne couldn't have been very good, because after 4 drinks, Mikkey's usually on one knee. Generally, we don't have any trouble with Mikkey at all. He's really part of the band, not like Brian Robertson pretending to be some kind of guest star. And he wants to be involved in everything, which is very good. Sometimes, though, he'll come on the bus in the middle of the night when everybody's sleeping and blast the stereo. Me and Phil usually get bunks as far away from the front lounge as possible. But that's a very small price to pay for what we get having Mikkey in the band. Anyway, I need to backtrack a bit and talk about the making of March or Die, because quite a lot went on during that time, in addition to our changing drummers. For one thing, Los Angeles had a riot after the Rodney King verdict. We were at the Music Grinder, which was in the east part of Hollywood, right on Hollywood Boulevard, in fact, recording Hellraiser rather appropriately. I came out from doing my vocal, and there was a TV in the lounge showing a burning house. And I looked out the window and saw the very same house from the other side. It was right down the street. Everything was on fire. People were running around. It was complete mayhem. Mikkey was there, and he was screaming, my car's outside. And the guy from the studio came in and said, we've got to cut it a bit short today, boys. As you can tell, we weren't terribly concerned with the historical significance of this event. We went home. There was a curfew, it turned out, for about 4 days, and it was like driving through a battle zone. The rioters, I heard later, got as far as the Beverly Center, but not all the way to Beverly Hills, which, if you ask me, would have been the logical place to go if you're downtrodden. Black people were attacking Koreans. Where the did that come from? I don't care how lippy the Koreans are in their stores. You don't have to go to that store then, do you? Take your business somewhere else. And then they burn their own corner stores. That's really smart, isn't it? And on top of that, the whole thing was being taped by the news crews and the police helicopters, and these rioters were waving into the cameras going, "Hi, I'm looting." I mean, your number one rule about looting is not to be seen doing it, right? These people wanted to be media personalities even more than they wanted to be free. Idiots. They deserve to go to jail if you ask me. We also got a new manager named Todd Singerman. As far as Motorhead goes, that had some historical significance. I don't remember how we were introduced, but Todd just showed up at my house one day. He wouldn't leave until I said he could manage us. I don't even know how he got to Motorhead because he had never heard of us before. "I want to be your manager," he told me, and I said, "But you haven't had any experience." "Don't worry," he said, "I used to work for a congressman." Fixated. I'm not kidding. He was around every day ringing the doorbell. "Hi, it's Todd." And I was like, "Oh." But he was chauffeuring me around and taking me to parties and different things, showing how useful he was. Finally, he wore me down. Doug Banker wasn't working out, and I knew we needed another guy, so I said to the rest of the band, "Look, we need a new manager," and they were game because they had been after me to get rid of Doug Banker for a while. And I told them, "I've got this guy called Todd Singerman. I think he'd be good." Wurzel was suspicious. After Doug Smith, he never trusted anyone. Life can do that to you, But Todd came around and talked his way into the job. He worked hard to get the job, and now that he has it, he has to work even harder. Any time he complains about being snowed under, I just tell him, "Look, you volunteered for the job, man. Too bad." And he does an excellent job. Todd's a fighter, and we need someone like that. He's persistent too, something I learned about him early on. Somewhere in the midst of all this, and there's even more to come, March or Die got made. We used Pete Sully again, but as often happens with our producers, he wasn't as good the second time around. I think the title track to the album was the sticking point, cause he had his version of March or Die, and that was it. I wanted a few things changed, and he didn't help me at all. He just sat there, put his feet up on a chair, and let the engineer work on it. I thought that was a bit. That's why March or Die didn't work. It should have. It was a tremendous track, and I have a couple of takes of it on tape that are much better than the version on the album. Other tracks are quite good, like Stand and You Better Run. The record label wanted us to cover a standard, and it was Phil Campbell, I believe, who came up with the idea of doing Ted Nugent's Cat Scratch Fever. Frankly, I like our version of it better than Nugent's. His is very thin, if you ask me. Ours knocked his out of the loop. Of course, nobody remembers ours. Overall, I think March or Die is underrated. I bet you think I'm going to put a good portion of the blame for that on the record company, and you're right. WTG was dying as we were making this record. Every time we came by their offices, there were fewer and fewer people there, and by the time the album was released, only Jerry Greenberg and Leslie Hawley were left. But the biggest indication about where we stood with our parent company Sony came when we released March or Die's single, Ain't No Nice Guy. The track had everything going for it. It was a great song to begin with, and since it was a ballad, it had serious radio potential. Then I wound up having Ozzy sing on the track along with me. Initially, he wanted the song for himself, but I wouldn't give it to him. Maybe I should have let him have it. More people would have heard it, so I had him come in and put vocals on, and Slash from Guns N' Roses contributed the guitar solo. He came in one day, had a few drinks, and laid down a couple of guitar tracks. Incidentally, I like Slash quite a bit. Guns N' Roses may have had a nasty reputation, but he's a very nice, very genuine guy. Anyhow, we had this great song featuring two of the biggest performers in heavy rock. Jerry at WTG knew it was a great song. There was no way we could lose it. That is, unless our record company tried to purposely sabotage it. And that is exactly what happened. It was a band's worst nightmare. Ain't No Nice Guy was actually a radio hit, but that was completely down to us without any help from Sony or its marketing department at Epic. We asked them to get it on AOR, album-oriented rock radio, and they wouldn't do it. They said we asked AOR and they wouldn't play it. That we knew was a blatant lie because our management got it on. One of our own men, Rob Jones, and another guy we hired made all the calls to the radio stations. With 2 phones, we got 82 AOR stations in 2 months, and all these stations told us that Sony had never pushed it. These people had never even heard of the track until we told them about it. Ain't No Nice Guy wound up number 10 in the radio charts, and Sony didn't make call 1. Imagine what would have happened if they'd given it just the slightest amount of effort. But no, they actually tried to stop it from being played. One of the label's radio guys called up a station in Kansas City and said, "I heard you're playing Ain't No Nice Guy. I wish you wouldn't. We didn't give it to you." What a hole. Here they had a hit song and they were going around trying to kill it. Our manager Todd rang this goon and totally lost it with him. "I've been kissing your ass for 1.5 years to try to make you do your job," he told the jerk. "I've done my job, and the only person who hasn't is you. If that record isn't back on rotation by 10:30 tonight, I've got some cousins in South Central who will make sure you don't write any more rejection slips for anyone." Of course, we were back on the air an hour later, but isn't it sad that they make you go to that level? They give you no recourse. If you're nice to them, they think you're a pushover and ride all over you. If you're an hole, at least you're dealing with them on terms they can understand, but more likely than not, you will be fired, which is eventually what happened to us. But being an hole seems to be the only thing that'll get a reaction out of these bloody suits. Since we didn't get any help from the record company at radio, to put it mildly, it won't surprise you to learn that they also held us up at MTV. Here we were with this, number 10 song on rock radio, and all we needed was about 15 grand or so to shoot a video, but they wouldn't let us have it. So we took about $8,000 of our own money and made our own. Ozzy and Slash, nice guys that they are, even came down and appeared in it. Although the video's a bit jumbled, it didn't turn out too badly. But MTV didn't play it for a while because Sony took 3 weeks to sign the release. Let's talk about another thing we did that Sony wouldn't do for us. We got on The Tonight Show, and we were the first heavy rock band to appear on that show. Ever. It was our manager again, along with our independently hired publicist, Annette, who used their connections to get us on. Of course, the day we were taping, the record company sent a couple of corporate types to keep an eye on us. But that didn't disguise the fact that they had done nothing to get us on. In fact, they had told us it couldn't be done. I really enjoyed being on The Tonight Show. Jay Leno was really a gentleman, much nicer than David Letterman, whom we had never even met when we did his show. Jay came up to the dressing room 2 hours before the show and asked us, "Have you got everything you need?" He didn't have to do that. During rehearsal, people were running around panicking over the usual nonsense. "You can't have it that loud. It vibrates the cameras." So I said, "How did they shoot all those train crashes then?" It was bull. Nothing shakes those cameras. They were saying the same thing at the BBC 20 years ago, and it was lies then too. But the actual show was a lot of fun. After our first number, I had to give $5 to Branford Marsalis, who was the Tonight Show band leader at the time. Todd had introduced me to him at a club in Hollywood one night when we had just started with Jay and the Tonight Show. I said to him, "You should have us on the show." And he said, "Yeah, we will." "Ha, I bet you $5 you don't." He said, "Okay," and we did get on. The other guests included that kid Neil Patrick Harris and character actress Edie McClure. She was a great girl. I had fun talking with Jay and joking around with Edie. We played 2 numbers, and overall, it was a very good show. No thanks to Sony. A couple of weeks prior to our Tonight Show appearance, we also played 3 West Coast dates on the Metallica/Guns N' Roses Stadium tour. I'm not sure how we got on. It was probably Metallica's work. They're the only band to have ever acknowledged their debt to us. These 3 stadium dates went well, especially the latter 2. We got all the PA and were treated with a decent amount of respect, which is as it should be. Speaking of respect, I suppose this is as good a time as any to get back to the ugly business with Sony, where we had no respect whatsoever. I can only conclude that WTG was used as a tax loss for Sony because of their attitude toward us. It seemed as if they did nothing at all to help us, and everything to damage the sales potential of our records, especially March or Die. When that album came out and only Jerry and his assistant were left, we knew that WTG was on its way out. But we figured that Sony would put us on one of their other labels, probably Epic, because that's who was doing our marketing. That's the sort of thing that usually happens, and with the Grammy nomination and the great reviews we got for 1916 and on March or Die, for that matter, it only made sense. But no, they dropped us, and to be perfectly honest, I think they did us a favor. Those Neanderthal corporate executives at Sony are all stupid, ignorant, elitist twats. And that's not sour grapes, because I felt that way long before they dropped us. They've got no idea about music at all. They sell millions of records, but wouldn't you if you had Michael Jackson catalog and Mariah Carey? Believe me, Mariah Carey is far better off without Tommy Mottola. Mottola was the one who wouldn't even acknowledge me at his own Grammy party. Him and the rest of them. They're the most inept bunch of mother I've ever seen in my life. Oh yes. We did some headlining dates in Argentina and Brazil, and then, before having to regroup and think about getting a new record company, we attended the CMJ convention in New York. CMJ is a college music trade paper, and it holds a convention every year. Several organizations have these music conferences, and I've been to quite a few of them. They're odd affairs. There are generally a bunch of minor executives slapping each other on the back and spending their expense accounts at the bar. But there are also a lot of younger people, not much more than fans, who are just starting their careers in the music business. Poor souls. And of course, the corporate suits have a few artists they're trying to parade around. I was there, but nobody was parading me around. Nobody dared. Wurzel and I were on a panel. Those things are such jokes. Nothing meaningful ever gets said. At this particular one, some woman metal singer who called herself the Great Cat wasted everyone's time babbling on and on about how wonderful she was. Wurzel, meanwhile, was taking a piss in a bottle behind the tablecloth. But I do remember that particular year's convention fondly because Wurzel and I ran into a man I very much admire, guitarist Leslie West. Leslie West is great, a complete maniac with these mad, psycho eyes. I introduced him to Wurzel, and he gave Wurzel this look and said, "Tell me, is that a name your mother heard of, or was it given to you later?" Wurzel, who was a bit unnerved by Leslie's mad stare, replied, "Later in school." "Tell me, Wurzel, tell me the truth. Do you take drugs?" Yes, I do." "Step this way." So they disappeared into the men's room, both of them in one stall, which is not an easy thing to do considering Leslie's size. West dropped the cocaine on his shoe and he said, "I don't want you to think wrong of me, Wurzel, but you're going to have to go down on me now." So Wurzel had to get down and snort it off of his boot. Leslie West didn't have much patience with this convention. "I can't stay here, Lemmy," he said. "All these people are peasants." "I know that," I said. "I'm trying to get out of here myself." "Well, I'm leaving," he said. "It grieves me, Lemmy, to leave you alone here, but I'm going." And he went out to his car and took off. Can't say I blame him. They never did. For him, any of his record labels. There's a guy who should be number one, but he's been ignored for years by the hit machine. Anyhow, by the end of the year, we were without a label once again. But we were much better off, if you ask me. After hearing one too many lies from the powers that be at Sony, I finally asked one guy there, "Why didn't you tell us the truth?" And this was his response, absolutely verbatim. "That's not the way this business works." Can you imagine somebody saying that? How could you be so dishonorable? But after almost 30 years in the music business, I should have figured it out. I've always said that good business is theft. If you've got a good business day, you've stolen somebody's money. These people treat music purely as a commodity, like selling cans of beans. Most of the people that promote bands have not even heard of the bands that they promote. They just got a name that came up in the shuffle. Nobody seems to believe in the music anymore. The industry's building all the time, but they're killing the music. They're trying to anyway, but I won't let them as long as I'm alive. You know, they are disgraceful, stupid, arrogant, forgettable. That's right, forgettable, because people are going to remember me, but the suits will be forgotten. Who are they? Somebody who worked for Sony? Ha! You'll have to do better than that. Well, that's the end of part 2. Let me know what you thought of part 2 in the comments below. That does it for today's video, guys. I hope you enjoyed. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. I really appreciate the support. I'll see you next time. Till then, rock on.